Tonight, we pull back the heavy velvet curtain on one of the most famous faces in history. A face that was, ironically, almost entirely painted on. We are talking about Elizabeth I, the so-called Virgin Queen. You know the image. The chalk-white skin, the towering red wig, the pearls stacked like she personally mugged an oyster bed, and a dress so stiff and enormous it could file its own taxes. But behind all that lead-based makeup and carefully staged mystery was a real woman who survived things that would make your worst Monday feel like a warm bath. Her father killed her mother. She was declared a royal accident, locked in a tower, and quietly told by nearly everyone that she would probably not make it to 30. And yet somehow, she ended up ruling one of the most powerful kingdoms on earth for 45 years, without ever once letting a husband, a rival, or a Spanish invasion tell her what to do. So dim the lights and get comfortable. Let us drift back to the autumn of 1533, to a drafty English palace where a baby girl was born to a father who wanted anything but a daughter. Elizabeth Tudor arrived in the world on the 7th of September 1533 at Greenwich Palace, and she was, from her very first breath, a disappointment, not because of anything she did, but because of what she was, a girl. Her father, Henry VIII, had torn England away from the Catholic Church, defied the Pope, discarded a devoted first wife, and dragged an entire kingdom into chaos, all for the promise of a son. The birth announcements really were a small comedy of clerical panic. Scribes had prepared documents proudly proclaiming the arrival of a prince. When the baby turned out to be a princess, they did not have time to rewrite the whole thing, so they simply added a hasty letter at the end of the word and hoped nobody would mention it. Somewhere in the archives of English history is essentially a typo that reveals a king's crushed ego. When Elizabeth was 2 years old, her mother stopped existing, and no one bothered to explain why to a toddler. Anne Boleyn was arrested on invented charges of adultery, incest, and treason, and beheaded within the walls of the Tower of London in May of 1536. Overnight, Elizabeth went from being a cherished princess to a small inconvenience. Her father's marriage to Anne was declared invalid, which meant, in the cold logic of Tudor law, that Elizabeth was suddenly illegitimate. She was no longer Princess Elizabeth. She was simply the Lady Elizabeth, a demotion so severe. It is said she asked, with heartbreaking childish precision, why she was called Lady one day, when she would been Princess the day before. Inas, was Elizabeth was shipped off to the countryside to be raised largely out of sight. There were stretches when her household ran so short of money that her caretakers wrote pleading letters begging for funds, since the girl was outgrowing her clothes and there was nothing to dress her in. Yet these shadow years were not entirely bleak. Removed from the constant scrutiny of the main court. So while her father lurched from marriage to marriage in a soap opera of beheadings and annulments, his forgotten daughter was quietly becoming a serious, watchful, formidably intelligent young person. She proved to be a startlingly gifted child. Her tutors, including the renowned scholar Roger Ascham, were astonished by her appetite for learning. She mastered Latin, French, Italian, and Greek, and could hold conversations, translate texts,
Wow.
and argue philosophy with a fluency that embarrassed grown men. In an age when most women were taught to be silent and ornamental, Elizabeth was quietly being forged into one of the sharpest minds in Europe, and almost no one thought to be worried about it yet. Growing up, Elizabeth watched an entire rotation of stepmothers pass through her father's court, each arriving with hope and most departing in tragedy. Jane Seymour, who died giving Henry his longed-for son. Anne of Cleves, dismissed for the crime of not matching her portrait. Catherine Howard, a teenage cousin, who lost her head almost as quickly as Elizabeth's own mother had. And finally, Catherine Parr, the sixth and final wife, an intelligent, reform-minded woman who took a genuine interest in Elizabeth's education and gathered the scattered royal children under something resembling a family. For a brief moment, Elizabeth had stability, warmth, and a maternal figure who actually valued her mind. It would not last, because in Tudor England, nothing ever did. In the summer of 1553, the young King Edward died, and England plunged into a succession crisis. Elizabeth's devoutly Catholic older half-sister Mary swept in to claim the crown. Both women knew the truth. England now had a Catholic queen, and Elizabeth was the Protestant heir standing directly behind her. The relationship between the sisters curdled almost immediately, poisoned by religion, rivalry, and the long memory of their tangled family history. Elizabeth found herself in the most dangerous position imaginable. Because roll the fate. In early 1554, a Protestant uprising known as Wyatt's Rebellion exploded against Queen Mary, and although Elizabeth almost certainly had nothing to do with it, her mere existence made her the obvious suspect. Then came the moment she must have dreaded her entire life. Mere existence made her the obvious suspect. Then came the moment she must have dreaded her entire life. She was rowed to the Tower of London, the same fortress where her mother had been beheaded 18 years. She reportedly refused at first to step ashore, sitting stubbornly in the rain, knowing precisely what that gate had meant for Anne Boleyn. Locked inside, stone walls, uncertain whether each day would be her last, Elizabeth held her nerve, undenied everything, and gave her sister's investigators nothing they could use against her. Elizabeth was patient till Light's arrest at the crumbling old palace of Woodstock. There she lived under the watchful eye of a guardian tasked with the impossible job of containing her. Elizabeth was patient, polite, and infuriatingly difficult to accuse of anything, and outlasted her captors through sheer stubborn survival. And then, on the 17th of November, 1558, Mary died, and the woman who had survived illegitimacy, imprisonment, scandal, and near constant threat of execution became Queen Elizabeth I. According to legend, she received the news beneath an oak tree at Hatfield and quoted scripture in Latin. And Elizabeth did not simply ride past her subjects in stony royal silence. She engaged with them. She stopped to receive gifts, listened to pageants staged in her honor. Silence. She engaged with them. She stopped to receive gifts, listened to pageants staged image making, and it revealed the strategy that would define her entire reign. Make the people love you, and no rival plot or enemy can easily take you down. The great question that haunted her advisors for her entire reign was whether she would marry. Suitors were paraded, negotiated with, and ultimately rejected. Elizabeth understood something that her counselors struggled to grasp. A husband would become the real power, and a foreign prince would risk making England a province of someone else's empire. So she played the game masterfully, keeping negotiations alive for years, dangling the possibility of marriage to extract diplomatic concessions, and never actually committing. She turned her supposed weakness, her sex, into her greatest asset. The unmarried queen belonged to no faction, no foreign power, no ambitious husband. She belonged only to England. The greatest threat of her reign came in 1588, when Spain sent the mighty Armada, a vast fleet of 130 ships, to invade England and depose her. Young Elizabeth rode out to her troops at Tilbury and delivered one of the most famous speeches in history. She told them she knew she had the body but of a weak and feeble woman. But she had the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. The Armada was scattered by English fireships and wrecked by storms, and the legend of the invincible queen was born. Behind the ceremony and the legend was a shrewd, patient, hard-working ruler who understood the levers of power intimately. Elizabeth survived decades of assassination plots, in part because of one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks the world had yet seen, masterminded by her ruthlessly effective the spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham. He planted spies in the households of conspirators, decrypted secret letters, and often knew about plots against the Queen before the plotters had fully hatched them. It was through his patient, meticulous work that the Babington plot was exposed, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was ensnared for all its dangers and intrigues. Elizabeth's reign coincided with an astonishing flowering of English culture and ambition, a golden age that still bears her name on the stage. Playwrights like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe were transforming the English language into something dazzling and immortal. On the seas, bold adventurers like Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe and raided Spanish treasure ships, while men like Walter Raleigh dreamed of colonies across the Atlantic. England, once a minor and vulnerable island kingdom, was becoming a confident cultural and maritime power. But time, the enemy Elizabeth had fought so hard to disguise, eventually came for everyone she loved. Her great love, Robert Dudley, died in 1588. Her loyal spy master Walsingham followed, and then her most trusted advisor of 40 years, William Cecil, the steady hand that had guided her since the very beginning. The execution of her beloved, foolish Essex left a wound that never healed. Surrounded by a new generation of courtiers dears who had never known the perils of her youth, the aging queen grew increasingly melancholy and withdrawn. In the early months of 1603, Elizabeth entered a deep and unshakable decline. She reportedly refused to go to bed, standing or sitting for days as if unwilling to surrender to the end. On the 24th of March, 1603, at Richmond Palace, Elizabeth I died, closing not only her extraordinary 45-year reign, but the entire Tudor dynasty, having named no child of her own. The throne passed to her cousin's son, James VI of Scotland, uniting the crowns. The wrong kind of baby, the illegitimate prisoner, the queen who married no one, had outlasted them all and become a legend that would never fade. She had been underestimated at every turn by people who assumed the story was about someone else, and she had proven every one of them wrong. In the end, Elizabeth I became something greater than a queen. She became a legend that time itself could not fade, remembered not for the crown she was never supposed to wear, but for the extraordinary way she wore it. So tonight, as you sink into your soft, warm bed, spare gentle thought for the wrong kind of baby who outlasted them all. History can be cruel and lonely and impossibly heavy, But it is also proof that people can survive almost anything, and sometimes against every expectation. Turn survival into something luminous. Rest easy, you made it through the day. And that is its own quiet kind of victory. Sleep well.